Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Bunker. As many of you know, I do enjoy speaking to fellow former Jehovah's Witnesses. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by a fellow former elder from the United Kingdom, Steve Harvey. Thank you so much for joining me.
Lloyd, it's lovely to be with you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Well, thanks for reaching out to us. I've read some of your notes and some of what you've said. It sounds like you have a very interesting story. You've been a coordinator of the body of elders, and having left the organization, you've also had some experience with pursuing your data. Is that right?
I have, yes. What you say is true. I was an elder for many years, congregation secretary, and as you say, coordinator of the body of elders, which is the new phrase for what was a presiding overseer back in the day. And yes, there was a period of time, almost a year, where I was battling to try and get some resolution on what the organization held on me and my desire for that to be deleted.
Okay, and we'll find out more about how that went down. But perhaps for now, it would be nice to go back to the beginning and find out how you first became involved with Jehovah's Witnesses.
So my family was third generation. So it was my grandparents on both my maternal and paternal side that were converted, as it were. My parents were raised as witnesses. And there was three of us, three children at home, and we were all raised as witnesses too. So all of my formative years into my teenage years, that's all we knew. Dad was an elder. Mum did the regular, regularly auxiliary pioneer, that sort of thing. And we were a busy family in the congregation. You know, we were that annoying family that were always used at circuit assemblies, you know, for demonstrations or interviews on family study and all that sort of thing. It was a little bit misrepresentative because it wasn't always a happy home life, but as with most families, there were challenges. But yeah, so we were all raised as witnesses.
Okay, and you know, not just ordinary witnesses, but if your parents are auxiliary pioneering, I mean, that's more than my parents were doing. So there's going to be expectation there, isn't there, for you to follow suit?
Absolutely. And, you know, as I say, my father was an elder many years, and from one perspective was a good elder. He was good at what he did. You know, he was a good speaker. He was well liked. And so there was a lot of expectation, you know, knowing that I was going to be speaking to you. Because I haven't done it for a long time, went back in my mind to start thinking about, you know, what it was like back then. And at that period of time, it was just all about regular pioneering. It was all of not wasting any time on any sort of education whatsoever. What is the point? It was the old polishing the brass on the Titanic, you know, illustration all the time. It was just get into the pioneer service as quickly as you could. And that's kind of all I remember about going through school. I enjoyed school, I enjoyed learning, but it was just about the moment that you could leave, getting baptized, getting the window cleaning round, and start regular pioneering. That was what it was all about, and that's what I did.
So you did the window cleaning too?
I did.
I've now interviewed multiple fellow former window cleaners because I did it for a few months, but gave up in the end because I kept falling off my ladders. But you muscled through, it sounds like.
I did. It just felt like, I mean, this was in London where I grew up. And at the time, the branch was kind of sending out Bethelites to help other congregations that were in the locality. And we had a few that were sent down, and that was just the culture. You can just window clean and you can start regular pioneering. And you'll probably be out on the service when Armageddon comes. That was the mindset.
You'll be able to claim your first house.
Yeah,
That
quite.
was how it worked, wasn't it? Armageddon homes. You'd have your eye on a particular house so that when Armageddon comes, you can step over the charred remains of the legal occupants and
Yeah.
claim it for yourself.
That was exactly it. So I got baptized at 15 at the old Bowes Road Assembly Hall, and which will be known to many, I'm sure, and left school June or July, whenever it was. Started regular pioneering that September, bang, straight in.
Sorry, when did you start? What age were you when you started regular pioneering?
I would have been 17 maybe. It was very quick after school. There was no additional education. It was just when you could leave school, leave. And I think, I'm trying to remember how it was structured. Did you have to auxiliary pioneer for 6 months or so? I can't remember. I think
you were supposed to auxiliary pioneer for a little bit at least. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So there was that period, but it was very much as it was available. That's what I did. So started regular pioneer. Maybe I was 18, but certainly 17, 18, late teens. Because I went
just for the benefit of viewers, because I recently ran a poll and found out that 40% of my viewers have never been Jehovah's Witnesses. They just like a good train wreck. They just love watching all of this stuff. So pioneering is where you devote formerly 90 hours per month. That was how it was just when I started pioneering, and then within a few months they switched it to 70 hours per month. So a regular pioneer commits 70 hours per month for free to promoting the Jehovah's Witness organization. So that's what you're describing doing from the age of 17.
Absolutely. And at the time, that there was a lot of emphasis on the yearly goal. 90 hours a month was the sort of suggested that will allow you time for sickness and a holiday. But as long as you got your 1,000 hours for the year, that was the magic goal. So did that and went to pioneer school when I was 19, I think I was. Soon after that, appointed a ministerial servant, and I was just on that sort of track, that's where life was going. And in some ways, I don't know how much at the time I questioned what I was doing. I don't know if I actually sat down and thought, is this really what I want to be doing? And this might sound strange, bearing in mind my history, but I don't actually consider myself a religious person. I don't. And I know that might sound strange thinking about what I've done with a large part of my life, but it was like being on a train and it was moving and you're just looking at the next stop. I don't know if I ever sort of thought, I wonder what it'd be like to be off the train or even for the train to stop. It was just ingrained.
Well, you don't start the journey as a child being raised by Jehovah's Witnesses with, shall we establish whether God exists? Do you? It's just always, everything is presupposed. And it's just a case of, don't worry, all of this has already been figured out. You just have to accept this. So there's never a point, if you are inclined away from religion, there's never a point where you get to opt out of it when you're being indoctrinated with this stuff. You just have to accept it, even if the way your mind works isn't naturally inclined towards religious faith.
Totally. And it is that, I think you're spot on when you use the words accept it, because I've often asked myself, did I believe it? Did I have absolute faith in what was going to happen? I don't know. I genuinely don't know, but I do know that I accepted it. Generally without question. I never, all of my research and checking would have been done through the congregation or through publications that the Watchtower Society provided. So there was no outside checking. I just accepted it. And I was on that train. And before you know it, 5-10 years can go by and you're pioneering, you're an elder, you're in the thick of it in the congregation. and it's time to sort of take stock about what actually is going on. And it was only really in later life, certainly well into my 20s, early 30s, that I started to have what I would consider proper doubts, proper worries that something wasn't right. And I don't, someone that gets someone that gets baptized at 15, I don't know if they're in a position to be able to quantify what they're going to do with the rest of their life. I couldn't, I was still changing what football team I supported at 15. It wasn't, certainly wasn't in a position to make that sort of commitment for the rest of my life. So late 20s, early 30s, I really started to have some doubts and question things. And then the whole realization of, well, do I believe this? Do I actually believe it? And there were certainly key things that really caused me to have reticence. And that, I suppose that's the beginning of waking up in some ways, isn't it?
So just so I can get it clear in my mind, you say late 20s, early 30s, around what year would this have been?
So I was trying to write this all out. This would have been, it would have been early 2000s. Mm-hmm. Early 2000s, I think I really started to think something doesn't feel right here. There were certain key things that were going on, certain decisions that troubled me. And you can, at that point, you either just put them back in a box, or as time goes on, you begin to let them evolve, grow, give them some thought. And that's
well, you're supposed to bury your doubts, aren't you? You're supposed to wait on Jehovah. That's the magic phrase. But if I had £1 for every time I've either said that or heard that, Lloyd, you wouldn't need to clean windows.
No. I mean, by that time I had moved on. I had started to get other jobs, which was good.
Okay.
I did the window cleaning for 2 or 3 years.
Right.
Then got other work. But yeah, that wait on Jehovah is just such a get out of jail, isn't it? It's essentially, we don't know, or we can't tell you, or if we do comment, we might contradict ourselves. Therefore, just wait on Jehovah. And no publisher's going to argue back on that, or very few would argue back on that, because it is just that blanket. Everything's going to be okay. Leave it in Jehovah's hands. That was the other one. Leave it in Jehovah's hands was what was said so often.
And you mentioned that there were certain decisions that troubled you. Are you able to think of anything in particular that was really kind of firing these doubts in your mind?
So there was a few things that really started to trouble me. The whole issue of disfellowshipping was something that I'd been involved in. I'd been on judicial committees, I'd been on appeal committees, and it just never sat right. And it mainly because, one, you could see the sort of hurt and devastation that it was causing, and that just didn't feel right. It didn't feel like it sat with what was supposed to be a loving organization. And two, you couldn't open the Bible and point to a scripture which categorically proved that it was the right thing to be doing. In fact, you could point to scriptures that would prove it wasn't the right thing. And I remember, Lloyd, having, there was an elder in one congregation that I was in who I was quite close to. We used to talk very openly. Some would say critically, but we were very open. And we had numerous conversations about disfellowshipping, and we would express concern, is probably the best word. And he said something to me once, which I'll never forget. He said, of course, the organization could never do a U-turn on this. I said, why? He said, just think of the lawsuits in America alone. And it was like, as he said that, it hit me hard. I thought, if that's the reason why there's no change on this, where there seems to be masses of changes on all sorts of other things, then that can't be right. There's something wrong there. So the whole disfellowshipping thing was a real issue. And then I don't remember, you'll know, Lloyd, I don't remember what year it was, but the thing about the generation, 1914 and the generation and the change of understanding, early 2000s maybe?
Yeah, I think if you're referring to the overlapping teaching, I think that might have been as late as 2010 or thereabouts.
Was it really? Oh my goodness. Okay.
We'll check and we'll put a caption just to be absolutely watertight. Tibor will put a caption for when the change was. Yeah.
The whole issue of the light getting brighter was another thing that troubled me. The generation thing was part of that, but there had been tweaks, along the way through the 80s and 90s. And at first I just accepted them again, but later on in time, begin to think, hang on a minute, if this is the food at the proper time, does that mean that wasn't the right food? And if it wasn't the right food, then where did they get it from? Where did that come from? And I used to sort of think about the fact that if someone in a congregation pre David Splane and his whiteboard, someone before then, 5 years before, had said, do you know what, this generation thing is wrong. You've got it wrong. They would have been chucked out the congregation and the door would have been closed and branded all sorts of things. But of course, later on, when the governing body decides it needs a change, then it's not an issue. And
the governing body are the only ones who are allowed to change their minds.
Exactly. And I sensed that there needed to be a change because that clock was ticking. I remember pioneering in the 80s, going around telling people, the generation that saw 1914 would not pass away. And
we were both baptized on that teaching, weren't we?
You know what? And since kind of waking up, I feel that I was cheated. I feel almost as if I could want to go to some sort of trades descriptions authority because that's not what I was sold. I bought into something on the basis of that teaching. Of course, there were other things involved, but that was a large part of it. And then suddenly it was like, no, that's not right. Actually, we're going to change that whole understanding. It's going to give us another 20, 30 years, maybe. So that caused me great concern. I have to be honest. That light getting brighter. After a while, it really worried me, caused me concern.
And if I can ask, I mean, you've mentioned about disfellowshipping and how that, from a first-hand perspective, as someone who was sitting on judicial committees, that troubled you. Are you able to, explain to us, how you feel kind of in hindsight about your involvement in disfellowshipping and whether, what sort of cases are we talking about? Are we talking about, cases of, fornication, or were there any child sex abuse cases? What happened there?
I was never involved in anything to do with children, fortunately. The vast majority of them were just involving immorality, people either having relations before marriage or outside of marriage. And they were the bulk of them. I never had any apostasy cases. You asked me how I feel looking back. Truth be told, Lloyd, dreadful. I can remember one girl who had a child, I think off the basis of a very, very brief relationship with somebody. Her father was not in the truth, her mother was. And I think she had, if my memory serves me correctly, she had got involved with this guy again on a one-off basis a year later. And I was on that committee and she was disfellowshipped, and that we stripped the last strains of connection that she had with any outside support and a young child. And I often think about her and wonder where she is and how she's doing. But that was very uncomfortable. I remember being on some appeal cases as well. There was one where very similar set of circumstances. Someone had got themselves involved with somebody, happened once, and then I think like 6 months later, or an extended period of time, it happened again. A work colleague, and the original committee had disfellowshipped her. She appealed. We went down there, and we listened to it all. And this woman wasn't wicked. You know, she was lonely and had slipped up a couple of times, but because it was repeated, she was the decision was upheld. And they're difficult. They're difficult memories, if I'm honest with you, Lloyd. It's difficult to think about how I was involved in something that would have affected people to such a great degree. And it made me think. There was one brother in a congregation who was the son of an elder, and he was a ministerial servant right into his 30s. And I remember having a conversation with him once about, you know, whether he wanted to serve as an elder. And he just said, not a chance. He said, there's no way that I would serve as an elder and get involved in the sort of things my father has had to. He cited child abuse cases and judicial work as the key reason why he just didn't want any part of it.
Wise man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wise man. But obviously, what many people don't understand about judicial committees is that you have these three elders, and it's not like they are entirely free to exonerate the person who's being interrogated, because the rules are that you all have to be in agreement. So there's no space for ending with a verdict of 2 against 1 for. It has to be, if there's one on the committee who doesn't think the person should be disfellowshipped, they have to fall in line with the rest. They have to come to a united decision. So presumably there would have been times where you were that one elder who did passionately believe this person shouldn't be disfellowshipped, but because of the rules, because of the way everything is rigged, you felt you had no choice but to support the decision anyway.
Because the other option is, if when you start discussing it, if it is 2 to 1, you either fall in line or you go back in and you rehash everything again. You spend another couple of hours. And of course, if it's 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, people don't want to do that. There's a human side to it. People don't want to do it. So it's just like, just make it unanimous, which is terrible, really, when you think about it.
Because you'd be seen as the troublemaker, wouldn't you, if you did want to prolong things?
You sort of then potentially go down the road of not being unified as an appeal committee. That was difficult.
And I've looked into this quite a bit. It's interesting because even though I was an elder for a year, I never served on a judicial committee. So all of this was theoretical. We learned about it in ministerial training school, but most of what I know about being an elder, I've basically had to relearn since leaving and studying the Shepherd book. But when there is an appeal committee is formed, made up of elders from other elders from, I think, other congregations, but their decision can be vetoed by the original committee. And if there's no agreement, ultimately it just gets taken back to the branch for the branch to decide. It's all a bit of a of a mess, quite frankly.
It is. The circuit overseer, who is the man that oversees up to 20 congregations at a time, he's involved in the first instance because the original committee would say there's been an appeal, and then the circuit overseer would appoint 3 elders, as you say, from another congregation to go down. And essentially you hear the case again. But all of it's done. I mean, you're now talking about a point where there is 6 elders in a room and the appellant. on their own again, maybe with someone sitting outside. But that doesn't feel right either,
because the original appeal committee are effectively being able to, in a way, influence proceedings, aren't they? They're there not just as observers, but as participants in the appeal hearing, so they can dictate the tone and flavour of the conversation, can't they, through their interjections?
Exactly. Well, once the appeal committee is appointed by the circuit overseer, there will be at minimum one telephone conversation between the chairman of the original committee and the chairman of the appeal committee. And that's the first framing of what's gone on here. So immediately this is why we went down that road. This is what we didn't see, or this was the facts of the case. That, of course, is only what you're seeing from one side of the fence, as it were. It's not a balanced presentation of the facts, with any situation, it's what you see, what I see, and then there's the truth in the middle. It's a very subjective thing. So you're right. They are almost sent down a certain path, as it were. The only time generally that there's a real overturning is if there was, I suppose, what in legal parlance would be called some sort of mistrial. There was a technicality that was wrong, or something wasn't done correctly, and then you might look to overturn. Or if there'd been an absolute howler, or maybe someone has come forward to disprove something that was said. But generally, the vast majority of appeal cases are upholding the decision of the original committee.
And of course, all of this, just to stress the point, because this will be new information, I'm assuming, for many people watching this. The whole point of a judicial committee isn't to establish whether the sin happened. That's already been decided. The point of the judicial committee is to decide whether the person is sufficiently sorry or not. That's what all of this is about. So it's conceivable that you could have a committee formed based on wrong information, where they've reached this conclusion, and the person can't be sorry because they haven't done it to begin with, or it's just been a horrible, misinterpretation of what's happened, and they're stuck in this situation where they've effectively got to convince a bunch of elders that they are remorseful for something that might not even have happened to begin with.
Absolutely. And the other issue that comes up is if somebody, let's say they have sex with a co-worker, and there's a judicial committee, and they express remorse, no further action. If it happens a year later, some would see that as repeated behavior. Therefore, you can't be sorry because you've done it again. That's very difficult. I think that's very, very harsh. I know I've done things. I've made some absolute dreadful decisions in my life, some real howlers, done some really wrong things. Doesn't mean I'm not sorry about them. I may have done them again.
Yeah.
But I feel bad about them. I feel sorry about them. But you're relying on three men who you may or may not know very well, discerning what's going on in your mind and heart, And when people, you think about the person who's sitting there in front of these three elders, when people are under extreme pressure or having real challenges in their life, people make misjudgments. That's part of human nature. And to start sort of disfellowshipping people for poor judgment or what's seen as repeated behavior, even if there's months and months in between it, felt and feels particularly harsh.
Would it have felt better for you as an elder, the whole disfellowshipping thing, if it applied purely to the congregation and not to contact with family members?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think there's still a bit of harshness to that. I think any form of shunning or alienation based on a judgment that's made by people, I think is harsh. But that would almost be a bit of a halfway house, wouldn't it? You know, if his family or maybe even just, don't overly socialize with this person, but don't, to shun them, to actually month after month make them feel worse and rub it in their face every time you see them.
Yeah, I'm just trying to imagine this from the perspective of someone who takes their beliefs very seriously. And one thing that we prided ourselves on as Jehovah's Witnesses was the fact that, it's not hypocritical in terms of how it might be in a church setting where someone's going to church on a Sunday and doing all sorts of stuff during the week, and then turning up on a Sunday as though everything's fine and they're this perfectly moral person. And we prided ourselves as Jehovah's Witnesses on this idea that if something wrong happened, you wouldn't have that sort of hypocrisy. You wouldn't have, for example, an elder standing on the platform when he's, committing adultery kind of out in the open brazenly during the week. So I guess trying to kind of see things from their side of things, you would think a reasonable compromise would be, you don't get to come to meetings until this matter, until there's some kind of obvious proof that you're sorry about doing this and won't be doing it again. But that doesn't mean you can't, have normal family relations, absolutely normal family relations, and also maybe speak to people outside of the church setting when you encounter them in the street, That seems to me to be like a fairly reasonable compromise. But with Jehovah's Witnesses, of course, it's all about control, isn't it? They want to be able to terrify people into submission, and the disfellowshipping weapon is their tool of choice.
Absolutely, it's the gun to your head. And what's particularly worrying is since I've been out of the organisation, I've had some that are still in it that I knew in my former life, who have made contact and told me about people that have been disfellowshipped without a committee. Some extraordinary things are going on. So as if the judicial process wasn't difficult enough as it was, this person being accused of things and having three men interrogate them about it, it would appear that there's now been a couple of cases where people have been disfellowshipped without any form of committee or chance to defend themselves in any way.
Was that not just an in absentia committee where they just failed to turn up or weren't sufficiently notified about it, but the committee happened anyway and found them?
I would imagine that the committee met anyway. But there was one, I met up with a couple who were still in the organisation, and they told me that as recently as about 18 months ago, there was a woman a sister in her 80s who hadn't been to a meeting for a good few years and had come across the Australian Royal Commission videos and expressed concern, expressed doubt about the way certain things were handled. Next thing you knew, she was disfellowshipped.
Right.
She wasn't invited to a committee, or if she was, she didn't get that invite, which is a responsibility of the committee to make sure that they do.
Yeah.
Right. But she was disfellowshipped. There was another ministerial servant who, in the same area, who was disfellowshipped over the phone after 2 or 3 very long conversations about organizational issues. And a member of his family reached out to me less than a year ago. It was over the phone it happened. That's wrong. It's wrong on any level.
Yeah, I think when you invest people with power, even if you have clearly defined rules as to how they're supposed to wield this power, the power itself can result in aberrations and people going to extremes simply by virtue of the fact that you've made them feel this important and made them feel as though they're responsible for for the cleanliness of the congregation. They're going to take things into their own hands, aren't they? Almost inevitably, as they say, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
So yeah, thank you for. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, interestingly, that's backed by the branch. I mean, we may come on to this in a moment, but I was able to get all of my records, everything that they held. And in terms of my disfellowshipping, the branch gave the committee authority to go ahead and do it without meeting with me or without contact. I've got it in writing. So, it's not just rogue elders firing off indiscriminately, that this had some backing from the branch.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. And that, again, it sort of speaks to this kind of power balance and hierarchy where, the ends justify the means, don't they? It's like, well, rather than do this by the book, here's what we want to happen. So let's just go ahead and do it,
Yeah, and who's going to challenge it?
Exactly. Who can complain? Okay. Well, thank you for, again, walking us through that, because I think, again, a lot of what I know about being an elder, even though I've been an elder, is kind of theoretical, and having read and reread many times the Shepherd book. So it's just useful to, hear from someone who's been on the coalface how this kind of happens in practice. I'd really like you to talk me through, because you mentioned obviously these doubts that started accumulating in the early 2000s. What was the straw that broke the camel's back, and how did you find yourself leaving the organization finally?
So I got to a point in my life where I knew I didn't believe it. And I knew that it was just the regular work that I had to do of meeting parts and whatever it might be that was just keeping me going. And, had I not had those to prepare for, I knew I wouldn't have the desire to study or to go to the meetings. And I guess inside I had died spiritually, is what someone might say, even though on the surface of it, I was a very busy, high profile, elder. And I had there was some very, very difficult, challenging circumstances at home with my ex-wife, and there were outside influences there. And I guess it was just a culmination of personal, congregation, secular pressures, and I just imploded. I got involved in wrongdoing. I made some dreadful decisions back then, some really horrendous mistakes, and there was just a big explosion, a big mess, and I walked away. And that was the last time I was in a Kingdom Hall, which would have been very late 2010, early 2011. And I deliberately I just didn't want any part of anything. I didn't want visits. I didn't want to talk it through with anybody. I just wanted to unplug and disconnect. My ex-wife at the time and we split up. I moved away from the area and just had a flat, and in a way kind of detoxed, if that makes sense. Just try to sort of get my mind clear. There'd been a big explosion, a big mess made, and had to try and just sort of sort out who I was and what I was doing. And I built a life outside of the organization, which prior to that happening had always seemed impossible. It was that, how do you pull that piece of the Jenga puzzle out without everything falling apart? But if there's one thing I would say, it's that it's possible. The organization wants you to think it's not, because they're not happy. The world is not happy. And guess what? I found there are some lovely, happy people who are not Jehovah's Witnesses. Shock. It's extraordinary. So I started to sort of build my life and put things back together. And my brother is not a witness. You actually know him. He's a patron of yours, and you pulled his. You did a draw recently, and his name. I think you own.
You won a book. You won a book, yeah.
So he's not a witness, but my sister and her husband, my mother and my father, although they're not together, were all witnesses. And although they were disappointed that I wasn't a witness, there was normal contact, as there was with my brother, who was not disfellowshipped. He just faded. Then I went on, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And then there was a chance conversation in London with somebody who spoke to my sister and said, oh, sorry to hear about your brother. And she said, what do you mean? What's happened? And she said, he was disfellowshipped. So she called me. She said, is this right? And I said, this is news to me. I don't know anything about it. So my sister called my father. He called the branch. He's in America. He called the branch in the UK, and they confirmed that I had been disfellowshipped 5 years earlier. And there had been this sort of period of time where few knew.
You'd been disfellowshipped for 5 years and you didn't even know it.
Nor did my family.
What's the point of disfellowshipping you if you don't even know you've been disfellowshipped? Because how can you avoid people?
This is my brother's question. My brother said, if it was Jehovah's will that he be disfellowshipped, why did it take 5 years for him to get the message?
Yeah. And furthermore, isn't the whole point of disfellowshipping intended to drive you to repentance? It's supposed to be an act of love that's supposed to make you turn around and realize what a terrible thing it is and strive to be repentant and get reinstated. How can you strive to get reinstated if you don't even know you've been disfellowshipped?
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't been to a meeting for many, many years. And so maybe, I thought I was just off the radar, but there we go. So of course, we're then in this very odd situation where my family, with the exception of my brother, who is my rock, the family suddenly, he's disfellowshipped. Well, we've got to stop contact based on a decision that happened 5 years ago by 3 men who never met with Steve and 3 men that we don't know. And I haven't seen or spoken to any of them since, sadly. Wow. So it was at that point, that was a very long way around, but at that point, I then called the branch because I thought, I want to know what's going on. But they wouldn't speak to me. They wouldn't give me any information because of data protection. So I said, well,
that was their justification for not speaking to you, was data protection.
Not speaking to me in terms of, we can't give you any information. We can't confirm or deny whether you've been disfellowshipped. It was laughable. So I said, last week, my father called and asked about me, and you gave him all the information. You told him which date it was announced, which congregation, and now you won't tell me. So I had to photocopy passport and driver's license. Not that my father didn't have to, he just had to say, I'm a witness in America.
Yeah.
So I had to send off proof of who I was.
You should have called in pretending to be someone else. Just some random person who was a Jehovah's Witness, and they probably would have given you everything.
Yeah, see, I should have, you're right. I should have just pretended to be one of the elders that I knew back then.
I'm a Jehovah's Witness who vaguely knows of Steve Harvey. Do you know anything about it? And they would have given you all the information then. Yeah.
Very bizarre. So I thought, right, okay, what's the story here? What's going on? And I said, look, I'm going to be speaking to, I found out which congregation it was that I've been disfellowshipped from. And I said, I'm going to be speaking to someone I know in that congregation, but I want copies of every single piece of information you hold on me. And when I've got it, I'm going to ask you to delete it. So they were a little bit disingenuous at first, because I had made contact with the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. And so I got a letter from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Britain saying, I haven't got anything on you. And then I got another letter later on the next day from the International Bible Students Association saying we don't hold any information.
I know what's happening here. This is the old cup and ball trick, because they then split themselves into the various different corporations. The one that does have the information is Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. So what they do is they just switch the letterhead to Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Britain, and then they say, oh, we don't have this information. And it's because it's literally being kept in the same building by a department that's calling itself something different.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
So after, so of course I went back to my family. I said, look, I've got these 2 letters that say they don't hold anything on me. So I can't confirm or deny if there has been a disfellowshipping.
Yeah, good news. It was all a horrible misunderstanding. This didn't happen. You can speak to me again. Literally
a month later, almost just a day less than a month, I got a letter from the Christian Congregation by email from the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses with a full list of what they had on me.
Bingo. Yeah, it's the cup and ball trick.
5 pages of it. 5 pages. I mean, I don't mean this in a big-headed way, but there was, because I was busy in the organization and had held various positions, there was probably more on me than what most might have, but only because I've been involved in a lot of stuff. But they've got everything, in terms of even down to things like, what languages you read and write in, and your history growing up, dates that you started things, dates that you did things, as in within the organization, that is, when you worked on quick builds or whatever. But I did get to the point where I was able to read what the elders that disfellowshipped me had written to the organization, which was quite enlightening, really. As I read it, it made me feel like it felt important to them that they made an example of me. That's what it felt like. So if I may, I'll just read you a short section of, this was from the elders in the congregation that disfellowshipped me to the branch. In part, they said, Steve was a very prominent overseer with parts at circuit and district level. He has left a trail of hurt feelings among family affected by his wrongdoing, and his actions are widely known. It is with this in mind that we feel it will be beneficial to bring this matter to a conclusion. Now, yes, there were definitely people hurt. That's without question. But it felt like this was a high-profile guy.
Well, whether it's widely known about or not has nothing to do with whether you're repentant.
You're correct, but the elders in the congregation wouldn't have seen it that way. This is somebody that can't be seen to be getting away with stuff, because a few years ago he was on the district convention platform teaching them. We can't, as they say, we need to bring this matter to a conclusion. So in response, the branch wrote back with various bits and concluded by saying, you can proceed with judicial action without contact with Brother Harvey if you so decide. So that's why I said to you earlier that it's not just rogue elders potentially.
So you have it in black and white that the branch instructed your elders disfellowship him and don't involve him.
I wouldn't use the word instruct. They gave permission.
They gave permission. Thank you. Yeah.
They chose to do that.
Wow.
It was an instruction. You can proceed with judicial action if you so decide. So they left the decision.
But that's significant, isn't it? Because that shows that it doesn't really matter in a way what's written in the Shepherd book, because it can always be overridden with a simple sentence in a letter to elders from the branch.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So,
And that has, by the way, permutations in other areas as well, because how can you point to the Shepherd Book as being a definitive set of guidelines when it comes to child sex abuse, when these guidelines can so easily be overridden with a piece of correspondence from CCJW? What's the point of having guidelines if they can be just thrown out of the window on a whim by the branch office?
Or on some occasions by instruction from the circuit overseer, who is the representative of the branch in that.
There's no point in having a policy. How can you even call it a child sex abuse policy when anything in the Shepherd Book can be changed or can be ignored on a whim? Yeah,
absolutely. So I was, at the time, I was quite perturbed by the amount of information they had, and some of it was quite sensitive personal information, which I wasn't proud of, but I wanted them to delete it. So I asked them to erase that data. And they basically, what I'm going to describe now, basically took a year, because every time you make contact with the branch, they've got 30 days to respond. And on day 27, 28, they will. I basically said, I want you to erase all that data. They said, no, we're not going to. I said, I'm going to get the ICO involved, which is, help me, Lloyd, the Information Commissioner's Office.
Yeah.
Something.
ICO.gov, I think, is the address, and it will be shown, if Tibor is gracious, on the screen. And if it's any different, it will appear differently. But it's important that people have this address if they're watching from the UK and they would like to pursue their own data request.
Yeah, ico.org.uk, I believe.
Thank you. Yeah.
Correct that. So I got them involved. It helped a little, but not what I wanted. Essentially, the ICO will, after a period of time, appoint someone to specifically look after your case, and they're then your point of contact. And they do get in contact with the branch and say, we understand that you're holding this information on Mr. Harvey. He has asked that it be deleted. Can you give us a reason why not? The branch then come back and quote Article 6 and Article 9 of the GDPR regulations, which is, in my view, a little open to interpretation. Cut a long story short, they agreed to delete certain information, which I was pleased about, but it was kind of a bit pathetic, really. What they agreed.
Can you just, because this is new information for me, what's the significance of Article 6 and 9 of the GDPR regulations?
Basically, it comes down to what was to happen if I was to want to rejoin the organization. There needs to be some information on my history and past connections with the organization for them to pull upon. So those articles, well, the branch say, we find no basis for deletion of other personal data that we hold. We maintain the minimum amount of personal data, which I massively contest. It's not minimal. The minimal amount of personal data necessary for our legitimate religious purposes, according to Article 6 and Article 9 of the GDPR, which their argument is, we hold information on this person because we've had contact with them before, we have a history on them, and we need that if ever they were to come back into the organization. I suspect that if was the branch would say, well, it's all about protection. You know, if this guy was a murderer, or if he had a terrible temper, or was a child molester, then we would need to keep that information so that we could protect the congregation if he was disfellowshipped in the south, but went to a congregation in the north where nobody knew him. I suspect that's the main brunt of their argument.
And did the ICO find that compelling?
No. Cut to the chase. whilst they agreed to delete some information, it was only things like my mobile number, my email address, and the language I speak, which, you know, it wasn't really what I was after.
Yeah.
And the
which
ICO
is actually quite hard to deduce without having that on your records. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, there we go. That's what they said. Yeah. So the ICO at the conclusion, and we're now almost a year after the initial contact with the branch. Just under a year. Said to me, while I do understand your perspective on this matter, we accept that it is in the Jehovah's Witness legitimate interests to retain a minimum amount of personal data about an individual, which is only accessible by the elders of a congregation, so that it is able to identify any ex-members who would like to rejoin the organization, i.e. for the purposes of maintaining and administering the worldwide membership of Jehovah's Witnesses. We would also accept that it is in CCJW's interests to retain minimal information about the reasons for your disfellowshipping from the organization, providing it is held securely and not available to anyone other than congregation elders. This is so that if you wish to rejoin in the future, they are aware of these reasons.
This is actually quite heartbreaking for me to listen to, because it feels as though this is another example of religion just getting a free pass. We're a religion. You can't tell us what to do. We're this big, important organization that needs to be able to identify who wants to join or rejoin. And so therefore the rules don't quite apply to us. And
I mean, I through work had to go on a very brief GDPR familiarization course. And so I had a little bit of understanding of what was involved, and felt, if I'm honest with you, Lloyd, I felt confident that once I got the ICO involved, that they would maybe they would be left with my name and the last congregation that I was associated with. But all the sensitive stuff, I thought, you know, I'd be able to get that deleted. And I was disappointed to find out that I just ran into a brick wall and it didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, God, I mean, again, this is kind of a hammer blow to me, because, you know, we're pointing people to the ICO, and I guess bare minimum, you manage to get your data. And I think that's what lots of people would appreciate as a minimum. They at least want to know what Watchtower is holding on them. But it's very, very invasive that an organization that is so abusive and has traumatized people, you know, to such an unfathomable degree, gets to hold on to very personal private data on people and invoke its religious privilege as a reason for doing so.
Yeah. I mean, the only way that they're not going to have much is if, and this is not meant to be sexist, but if you're female, therefore you would have never been appointed as a ministerial servant or an elder in the organization. If you're female, if you have never auxiliary or regular pioneered, and if you've never been involved in any judicial action, then they're going to have very little information on you. But as soon as you start getting appointed to various positions or responsibilities, then what they have on you grows.
But when you say they can have very little, you know, let's say it is someone who has never served or never could serve in an appointed capacity, invoking their religious privilege, what's the minimum amount of information that they will hold on someone?
Don't know, but I do know that they recently, well, not recently, a few years ago, got people to sign a disclaimer which allowed the branch to hold information. So
yeah, that's their publisher ID database. Yeah.
So it's going to be name, address. It's going to be record of field service activity, probably an email address as well. That I would say is minimum. But as I say, as soon as you start to become more involved in the organization, certainly if you're involved in judicial action at all, then there's much more held. And in my view, unnecessarily sensitive information.
Or we've learned or I've learned of another way in which this organization is exploiting religious privilege to get away with nefarious activities and cause people misery. Because again, when you've been traumatized by an organization, in your case, disfellowshipped for 5 years before you even found out about it, the last thing you want is for these individuals, this organization, to be holding very sensitive details about you on its database. But apparently, because they're a religion, they get carte blanche, and it's wrong. And it's good to be able to identify these areas where they are invoking religious privilege, so that we can kind of compile our list of things that we need to rail against in terms of activism. Because you like to think that one day we will live in a society where religions won't be afforded this privilege and they will have to be held accountable.
Yeah. And the other gun that they have to your head about that is that you could never enjoy any privileges of service if you didn't sign that publisher ID. So
enjoying privileges of service is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to reach out if you take your religion seriously. So if you take your religion seriously as a Jehovah's Witness, you have to be in the publisher ID database.
Yeah.
Wow. So you've given us a lot of information there, and I wish that it had like a happy ending. I guess it does have a happy ending, because you're free and you're able to enjoy your life. And since we've run out of time, perhaps it would be nice to conclude with your thoughts or with your message for anyone watching this who is perhaps on the fence or still inside and wonders whether it's worthwhile starting to question things and forge a life for yourself outside of the organization.
So I would say, yes, I am happy. And I don't miss living with that constant guilt and feeling that you're not good enough. That has been an absolute release, more so than I could have ever known. What would I say? I would ask witnesses to examine what they know about the organization that they didn't learn from it. Because researching the organization using secular means is frowned upon. What do you know about the organization that you didn't learn from it? Or why is it that you only have learned about the organization from the organization? You wouldn't marry someone without meeting their family and their friends and getting an outsider's, a full picture of what that person is like. But that's essentially what we do with the organization. I would also say it's okay not to have all the answers. The witnesses use a get out of jail card of leave it with Jehovah's hand or Jehovah knows best. But, sometimes in life when we're searching for answers about things, it's okay to not know for a while. It's okay to not have an immediate reference to go to, I would say. And the other thing that I would say is, if Jehovah's Witnesses are a cult, what would it look like? What would they say to you? What would the rules be like? What would the general tenure be within the organization? And if what you describe is what you actually see, then you have to at least consider that it's possible, and frame that with the fact that Jeffrey Jackson said, and I quote, in answer to the question, do you see yourself as Jehovah God's spokespeople on earth? He answered, that I think would seem quite presumptuous to say that we are the only spokesperson God is using. So, yeah, just think about what it would look like. Would it look any different if it was a cult? What would be different about that organization? For everybody, it's going to be different things. But for me, they were some of the key things that sat in my mind and made me really consider what I was doing with my life. And Lloyd, I do have regrets that I used up a large portion of my life with that organization, but it's balanced by the happiness and contentment that I feel now.
Wonderful. So there is a happy ending.
Yeah.
Even if society is broken and we're at the wrong point in history and religion's allowed to get away with too much.
And I got to have a chat with Lloyd Evans, so it's all good.
Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed this chat. Thank you so much for joining me, Steve.
No worries. Thank you, Lloyd.
So viewers, I hope you've enjoyed our conversation. I certainly have. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such interviews. And as always, thank you for watching.